Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was a quiet, dimly lit liquor store tucked into the corner of a rundown strip mall, far from the bustling city center. The kind of place where the floors creaked and the shelves had a layer of dust that never seemed to go away. It had been a long day for Jack, the store's only employee for the night shift. He had just finished restocking the aisles and was mindlessly wiping down the counter when he heard the bell above the door chime. A man entered, dressed in a tattered jacket that looked like it hadn't seen a wash in years. His face was shadowed by the hood of his coat, but Jack could see the ragged breath in the cold air. The man walked down the aisles without saying a word. Jack didn't think much of it. It was not uncommon for odd customers to pop in at this hour. It wasn't until the man came to the counter that Jack started feeling uncomfortable. The man didn't place anything on the counter. He just stood there, staring at Jack. For a moment, there was silence, and Jack, despite the unease creeping up his spine, forced a smile and asked, "Can I help you with something?" The man said nothing at first, just looked at Jack with eyes that seemed too wide, too focused. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled photograph. He slid it across the counter to Jack. The photo was of the liquor store itself, but it was taken years ago, long before Jack had worked there. He frowned, unsure of what to make of it. "Do you recognize it?" the man finally asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Jack was taken aback. He didn't recognize the photo, but there was something familiar about the look in the man's eyes. Something desperate. Before Jack could respond, the man turned and walked out of the store just as quickly as he had entered, leaving behind a chilling silence. Jack shook his head, trying to shake off the feeling that lingered in the air, but the image of the man's eyes wouldn't leave him. He couldn't help but glance down at the photo again. Something about it gnawed at him. He had to know more. The next day, Jack went to the local archives to dig into the store's history. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Years ago, the store had been the site of a brutal murder. A man had been killed in the alley behind the store, the victim of a botched drug deal. The most disturbing part was that the killer had never been caught. The story was buried, but there were rumors that the ghost of the victim had been seen lingering near the store. That night, Jack returned to the store. He had to know if there was a connection between the man from the night before and the murder. The store felt different, colder. As the hours passed, a deep unease settled in the pit of his stomach. Around midnight, the bell above the door chimed again. Jack glanced up, but this time there was no one there. The store was empty. He got up from his seat, a chill running down his back. He checked the aisles, but no one was around. It was then he noticed something. On the floor, near the entrance, was a crumpled photograph, the same one from the night before. But this time, the photo wasn't of the liquor store. It was of the alley out back. In the image, there was a figure standing in the shadows, half obscured by darkness. Jack's heart raced. The man from last night had left this here, but why? As he picked up the photo, he felt a cold breeze brush against the back of his neck. He spun around, his breath catching in his throat. There, standing in the corner of the store, was the man. His eyes were wide, and his mouth was open as though he was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, there was a deep, almost unnatural silence that pressed in on Jack from all sides. The man's image began to distort, his features warping, melting into the dark shadows that consumed him. Jack stumbled backward, knocking over a bottle of whiskey. The glass shattered on the floor, the sound echoing through the empty store. But the man didn't vanish. He lingered, his eyes burning into Jack's soul. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the man was gone. Jack stood frozen, trembling. The store was silent once more, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. His mind raced. Was it a ghost? A hallucination? He didn't know, but the store felt different now. The walls seemed to close in, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still there, lurking somewhere just out of sight. The next day, Jack never returned to work. He couldn't bring himself to face the place again. The photo, the man, the chilling silence, it was all too much. But as he packed up his things and left town, one thing lingered in his mind. That photograph wasn't just a picture of the store. It was a warning. A warning that some things, some spirits, are still tied to the places where they suffered their final breaths. And for Jack, it was a reminder that some ghosts, whether of the living or the dead, never truly leave.
Story number 2.
It was a cold evening when Sarah, a university student working late on her final paper, decided to make a quick stop at the nearby liquor store. The store was open 24 hours, a convenience for late-night wanderers like her. The rain tapped gently against the windows as she walked in, the door's bell jingling softly. The store was nearly empty, save for an elderly man standing near the back, inspecting the rows of alcohol. Sarah wasn't paying much attention to him as she grabbed a bottle of wine and made her way to the counter. "Just a second, dear," the cashier, a middle-aged woman with pale skin, said. She was busy looking over a ledger and didn't seem to notice the old man was still standing at the back, now staring directly at Sarah. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and fixed. A chill ran through her. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked, trying to brush off the discomfort creeping up her spine. The woman behind the counter didn't respond. Instead, she turned and looked at the man. He smiled, but it was unsettling. His teeth were crooked and yellow, and his lips trembled slightly. The smile didn't reach his eyes. He raised a shaking hand and pointed at Sarah without saying a word. "That's strange," Sarah murmured to herself, shifting uncomfortably. She had never seen him around before, but there was something about him that felt wrong, too still, too quiet. The woman behind the counter gave a soft, almost inaudible sigh. "He's not supposed to be here," she whispered, barely enough for Sarah to hear. "It's better if you don't look at him too much." Before Sarah could respond, the man slowly began to move toward her, his footsteps unnervingly soft against the floor. His head tilted to one side as he closed the distance, and Sarah felt an almost suffocating pressure on her chest. She could hear him breathing heavily, his breath coming in shallow, raspy gasps. Suddenly, he stopped right in front of her, inches away, his face so close she could smell the decaying stench of old tobacco and something rotting. The store felt colder, and a low humming sound filled the air. It was as if the world itself had slowed down, the outside rain quieting as if in anticipation. "You don't belong here," the man said, his voice low and almost guttural. Sarah couldn't move. It was as if his words had frozen her in place. And then, in a blink, the man disappeared. The silence was deafening. Sarah stood there, heart racing, not sure what to do or what had just happened. She turned to the cashier, who was still staring at her with wide eyes. Did you see that?" Sarah stammered. The woman only nodded. "You shouldn't have come. He's been coming here every night for years, but tonight is different. Tonight he's searching for something." Before Sarah could ask more, the cashier pressed a button under the counter. The lights flickered, the store's front door slammed shut, and Sarah felt an oppressive weight in the room. It wasn't the same store anymore. It had shifted somehow. The shelves seemed taller, the aisles narrower, the walls felt alive. "Get out," the woman whispered urgently, pointing toward the door. "Leave now. If he finds you, you won't be able to leave." Sarah didn't need to be told twice. She bolted for the door, her heart pounding in her chest, her body trembling with fear. As she stepped outside, the air was thick with fog, and the rain had stopped completely. The streetlights flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows. She turned back to look at the store once more, but the door was already shut. The sign above it, dark. The next morning, Sarah went back to the liquor store. It was still there, unchanged, just like any other store in the strip mall. The door was wide open, the shelves neatly stocked, and the cashier behind the counter. But when she tried to ask about the man, the woman just smiled and shook her head. "He was never here," the cashier said softly, almost too sweetly. "Now, dear, I suggest you be on your way." Sarah left, but something about that place never left her. She tried to forget, to go on with her life, but every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear his raspy breath, feel his decaying fingers brushing against her skin. And every time it rained, she couldn't help but wonder, was it really just a dream? Or was he still out there, waiting, searching for someone else who didn't belong?
Story number 3.
The small town of Hollowbrook had always been quiet, nothing ever too unusual to draw attention. But that all changed with the opening of a new liquor store in the middle of town. It wasn't the first liquor store, but there was something different about this one. The others were always brightly lit, modern and clean, but this one was old-fashioned. It had an antique look, with dark wood paneling, low lighting, and a smell that reminded people of a time long past. Some townspeople found it charming, others found it unsettling. No one knew who owned it, but the man who ran the shop was a mystery. He was tall, thin, with a pale face and a deep, gravelly voice that seemed too loud in the hushed store. He always wore the same old-fashioned clothes, dark trousers, a waistcoat, and a long overcoat, no matter the weather. He never introduced himself, and most customers just referred to him as the proprietor. One evening, a young couple, Alex and Rebecca, decided to stop by after dinner. They had been hearing strange things about the store, whispers about its eerie atmosphere, but they were skeptical. They figured the rumors were just exaggerations, local gossip meant to stir up curiosity. As they entered the store, the heavy door creaked and a bell rang out, signaling their arrival. The air inside was thick with the smell of aged wood and liquor, but something else too, something faint, like mildew and damp earth. It was too quiet, too still. The shelves were stocked with a variety of bottles, some familiar and some that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. The lights hung low from the ceiling, casting strange shadows along the walls. The man behind the counter didn't greet them. He just stared at them with those intense, hollow eyes, his hands still as he polished a glass behind the counter. Alex and Rebecca exchanged an uneasy glance but pressed on, wandering the aisles. The shelves were oddly organized. There were no labels, only cryptic symbols scratched into the glass or wood of the bottles. "I don't know," Rebecca whispered as she ran her hand along the dusty bottles. "This place gives me the creeps." Alex nodded. "Yeah, it feels like time stopped here. Maybe we should just grab something and go." They made their way to the back of the store, where an old oak barrel sat against the wall. On top of it was a single bottle that stood out. It had a label that simply said "Drink Me" in scrawled handwriting. It wasn't a typical liquor bottle, but something about it drew Alex in. "What's the worst that could happen?" he said, reaching for it. Rebecca's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. "Don't," she said, her voice sharp. "Something about that bottle is off. I don't want to risk it." But Alex was already unscrewing the top. Without saying another word, he took a swig, his eyes closing as he felt the liquid burn down his throat. For a moment, nothing happened. But then his face began to pale, his breath quickened, and he stumbled back, knocking into a shelf. "What the hell?" he gasped. His stomach churned, and his limbs began to shake uncontrollably. Rebecca rushed to him, but it was too late. His body twitched violently as he collapsed to the floor. His skin turned ghostly white, his eyes wide and unblinking. He opened his mouth as though trying to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, a faint whisper filled the air, a voice that seemed to rise from the very walls of the store. "Leave!" Rebecca's heart raced. She grabbed Alex, shaking him, but he didn't respond. His body was completely unresponsive, as if the life had been drained from him in an instant. "Help! Somebody help!" she screamed, but the store was silent. The storekeeper finally spoke, his voice low and rasping. "He shouldn't have touched it." Rebecca looked up at the man, her eyes wide with panic. "What did you do to him?" The man simply nodded toward the bottle on the barrel. "That's not just liquor. It's a trade. A payment for those who dare to partake, a price for those who cannot resist temptation. He'll remain here, as they all do, until someone else comes to take his place." Suddenly, the temperature in the store dropped. Rebecca could see her breath fogging in front of her. The shelves around her started to creak, as if shifting. A dark, shifting shadow formed in the corner of the room, crawling along the walls, growing larger and larger, until it loomed over her. She backed away in terror, her mind racing for an escape. The man behind the counter smiled, but there was nothing human about his expression. "Don't worry, he'll make a fine addition to the collection." Rebecca turned and bolted for the door. As she reached the entrance, the bell rang, but the door wouldn't budge. She slammed her shoulder against it, desperate to escape, but it was as if the door had become a part of the wall. Then, in a voice that was no longer human, the shadow whispered to her, "There's always room for one more." Terrified, Rebecca turned to the man, but he was no longer standing at the counter. He was right behind her. His bony fingers brushed her shoulder, ice cold, and she screamed in horror. Just then, the door to the store slammed open with a force that sent Rebecca tumbling outside. She scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't stop running until she was back at her apartment, breathless, trembling, and in disbelief. She never saw Alex again. And every now and then, when she walked by the liquor store, she'd swear she saw his face behind the dusty windows, staring out at her, eyes wide, mouth open, still trapped within the walls of that cursed place. The store was still there, unchanged, but now it had a new sign: the price of temptation. And no matter how much she wanted to forget, Rebecca knew deep down that one day, someone else would walk in and make the same mistake.